community, and our nation's economy. At Univision, we could not stand by. Therefore, in 2010, the leading media company serving Hispanic America, Univision launched a comprehensive multi-year corporate education initiative called Es el Momento, The Moment is Now, in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the US Department of Education, educators, and civic and community leaders from across the country. The award-winning initiative aims to improve academic achievement among Hispanic students by reaching both parents and students. As mentoring is a key element to achieving this goal, Es el Momento partnered with Big Brothers Big Sisters on a campaign to encourage families to leverage the services offered by the organization and to recruit more Latino mentors. Together, we are making a difference in the lives of many Hispanic families, a difference that will impact our country's success in the long term. And as a member of the National Hispanic Advisory Council, I am delighted that Big Brothers Big Sisters realizes that our nation is changing and that we must change with it. 70% of the kids we serve are children of color. Latino children are Big Brothers Big Sisters' fastest growing demographic group. The largest group of children waiting to be matched is represented by African American boys. Still, only about 15% of the nation's bigs are African Americans, and only about 8% are Latinos. We must change this trend, and we should work and continue working together to make sure that we reverse this trend. Our first general session will help us focus on how we must be prepared to serve children who come from all kinds of backgrounds, children, families, and volunteers who represent the fabric of a great nation. That's why instead of one keynote speaker, we've invited 3 thought leaders to get us started this morning. They represent the 3 words I'll see throughout the week as part of the Reunite Now conference title. Those 3 words: vision, brand, and voice. Each thought leader will speak for about 15 minutes. Then you'll break up and join the one who can best help you in your work for a 1-hour breakout session. So let's meet them. Our first speaker represents our vision. Paul Tough is the best-selling author of How Children Succeed: Grit, Curiosity, and the Hidden Power of Character. He is also the author of Whatever It Takes, Geoffrey Canada's Quest to Change Harlem and America. Mr. Tough is a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine, where he often writes on education, parenting, and politics. His work has also appeared in The New Yorker and Slate and on The American Life. Our second speaker's message is one that is at the core of our brand relevance. Steve Pemberton is Divisional Vice President, Chief Diversity Officer of Walgreens, and author of A Chance in the World. He'll share the story of his childhood with a troubled mother, adolescence in foster care, and teen years with a caring adult who believed in his success. Mr. Pemberton's experiences are the foundation of his understanding of why, to serve our communities, our brand must evolve to remain relevant. And we'll hear from Dr. Larry Brentrow, who will address the importance of Big Brothers Big Sisters voice. Dr. Brentrow is one of the nation's leading experts on children and youth in conflict. He has trained professionals in 16 countries. Dr. Brentrow is Dean of the STAR Global Learning Network and former president of STAR Commonwealth, which serves troubled youth on Michigan and Ohio. In 1997, he founded Reclaiming Youth International, a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing and disseminating proactive policy, training, research, programs, and strategies to better serve struggling youth. Dr. Brentrow is a licensed psychologist, author, and editor of Reclaiming Children and Youth, a professional journal that covers strength-based interventions for youth at risk. He has been a professor of special education in the area of behavioral disorders and served as a member of the Coordinating Council on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Again, each one of our thought leaders will take about 15 minutes to set the stage for his breakout session. Then you can choose to attend the breakout that you believe will best challenge you in your agency work. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our first thought leader, Paul Tough.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ivelisse, first of all, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and a real honor to be in this room with so many people who are doing such important work to help children succeed. I'm here because I wrote a book, as Ivelisse said, called How Children Succeed. And it's a book that tries to take on the conventional wisdom that the one quality that matters most in a child's success is his or her IQ. This idea that it's all about this narrow band of cognitive skills that get measured on standardized tests. And I think this idea is behind our national obsession with standardized test scores. And even when we as individuals tell ourselves that they don't define us or don't define our kids, as a nation we've invested these tests with a whole lot of importance. And I think we do that because we really believe on some deep level that they measure what matters. But in the book, I'm drawing on the work of a new generation of researchers and educators who are arguing against what I call this cognitive hypothesis, who are saying, no, there's this very different set of skills that matter at least as much as IQ in a child's success, and probably much more so. Their list includes things like grit and curiosity, conscientiousness, self-control, and optimism. Economists call these non-cognitive skills. Educators, and a lot of the rest of us, think of them as character or character strengths. There is still a lot that we don't know about how these character strengths work. We're not very good at measuring things like conscientiousness and self-control in children. We don't yet have a perfect curriculum that we can give to a mentor or a teacher and say, this is how you make your kids more gritty. But there is a lot that we do know now. And one of the most important things that I think we understand about these character strengths is that, in contrast to the idea I think that a lot of us have, that character strengths are something that are innate, that you're just born with or not. In fact, these character strengths are very much shaped by the environment in which children grow up, both positively and negatively. And one of the most important negative factors in the development of these skills turns out to be stress. Now, stress is not always a bad thing. Every child experiences stress. An infant gets sad or scared or lonely and she cries and wails. And then usually someone picks her up and comforts her. She calms down. And it turns out the scientists who study stress have found that for most kids this is actually a positive experience, that the stress response system is in lots of ways like a muscle, and it needs that kind of regular exercise to develop. The problem is, for kids who are growing up in really deep disadvantage, with stress that is not mild and occasional, but that is intense and chronic, what doctors call toxic stress, that kind of stress does not help the stress response system develop. Instead, it debilitates it, it damages it. And that damage gets right under our skin, and it can last a lifetime. We can see its effects on our physical health, on our mental health, and on the development of this crucial set of attention skills called executive functions that matter so much in school. Now, I find this research about the biology of stress, about disadvantage and brain chemistry and success to be really important and fascinating. But I think there's also a risk in writing about it and talking about it the way that I've done. And that is that I worry that it can make us feel complacent or even fatalistic. The neurochemistry sometimes seems so powerful that we can't imagine that any child who grows up with really deep disadvantage, surrounded by toxic stress, can ever go on to real success. And yet, of course, those success stories are happening all the time. Those of you who've worked directly as big brothers and big sisters, I'm sure, can think of some examples from your own work of kids who have grown up with an early childhood surrounded by stress and trauma and who have gone on to real success. But what we know about these success stories is that if we want to help kids succeed in this dimension, in this non-cognitive or character dimension, there are two times in a child's life that are especially fruitful if we want to intervene. One is in early childhood, when, as we know, the brain is especially plastic, especially malleable. But the other is in adolescence. And that's because of a phenomenon called metacognition. Metacognition is a term that psychologists use. It just means thinking about thinking. And it is in adolescence when, for the first time, young people are able to really reflect on their own thought processes, to really think deeply about themselves. And it's at this moment that they're able to make really profound changes to make different decisions about the way that they're living, to change their patterns, to change their habits, really to change their whole character. But one thing that's clear in the research is that when kids have these sort of transformative experiences, they never are able to do it alone. They always need help. They need some caring and connected adult out there to reach out to them and connect with them just when they need that help the most. Sometimes that person is a family member or a teacher, but very often it's someone else. It's a mentor, a coach, someone who is outside of that family or school context, who can help provide young people with a different way of thinking about their lives, about their possibilities, about what's possible for them. And I think that's exactly what Big Brothers and Big Sisters are doing all across this country every day. So when I was reporting this book, I didn't write directly about Big Brothers and Big Sisters, but I did spend a couple of years following a mentor organization called Youth Advocate Programs, or YAP, that is very much in the Big Brothers, Big Sisters model. And YAP had been hired by the Chicago Public Schools to work as mentors with the kids who were most at risk in the whole city of Chicago. They actually came up with this statistical formula to find the 300 kids who were most at risk of being involved in gun violence over the next couple of years, either as perpetrators or as victims. So these were kids who faced a lot of really significant challenges. And YAP found a mentor for each one, someone usually who lived in the community. And they worked with them very intensely, mentored them for 10 or 15 hours each week. And it didn't work for every kid. Some of them didn't find the right mentor, some dropped out, some weren't able to find that right connection. But for the kids who did, it was a powerfully transformative experience. Real metamorphosis seemed to go on for some of these kids. I want to tell you just a little bit about one young woman who I spent a lot of time with, a girl named Keitha Jones. And when I met her, she was a senior at Fenger High School on the south side of Chicago, one of the most troubled, low-performing, violent schools in the whole Chicago public school system. And Keitha, at this very violent school, had a reputation as one of the meanest, toughest kids. She had a reputation as a fighter. When I met her, she told me she had been kind of proud of this reputation. And I asked her, so why? Why do you fight so much? And she started telling me stories about her childhood. And she grew up in this neighborhood of deep poverty, without a lot of resources. She had a family that was fractured and chaotic, unstable. A lot of her family members were involved in the drug trade, either as customers or as dealers, so she saw a lot of violence growing up as well. And then she was abused sexually, starting in the 6th grade by a family member, someone who lived at home. And she could never bring herself to tell her mom about it. She didn't trust that her mom would have the reaction that she wanted, that she would support her, that she would believe her. And so she just kept quiet about it. She got angrier and angrier. And she used to take that rage with her to school every day. She told me that her theory was that you couldn't really hit an adult. She couldn't fight with people in her family. And so she would go to school every day looking for somebody to fight. And the first person who looked at her wrong, she would just haul off and slug. As you can imagine, this particular anger management philosophy didn't go over too well with the administration at her school. So they kept suspending her, giving her these 10-day suspensions, and she fell further and further behind in her studies until she was on the verge of dropping out. And then the principal connected her with YAP. And YAP found her this mentor, a young woman named Lenita. And Lenita and Keitha just found this connection, a connection that Keitha hadn't felt with anybody before. I spent a lot of time with Lenita, and she was just a great, great mentor. And what I liked about her was that, she had this great skill at connecting with young people, and yet she wasn't, a PhD in child development. She owned a beauty salon, ran a beauty salon on this rundown block on the south side of Chicago. And she didn't use any particularly sophisticated psychotherapeutic techniques. She just talked with Keitha. She gave her a job as a shampoo girl in the salon, washing customers' hair and sweeping up afterwards. And in between customers, Keitha and Lenita would just talk. And then they'd go out to Wendy's and they'd talk some more, and then they'd go bowling and they'd talk and talk and talk some more. And as they talked, Keitha found herself opening up for the first time in her life. And as she opened up, she felt this possibility. She felt herself open up to the possibility that there was another kind of life for her that she wanted to change, she wanted to embrace. And so with Lenita's help, she stopped fighting. She started finding other ways to deal with confrontations at home and at school. And she decided she wanted to graduate on time with her class. And that was going to be a real challenge because she was so far behind. There were lots of credits she didn't have. But Lenita and the principal and Keitha worked together to find a way for her to do a ton of work in her senior year. She did night school and weekend school, credit recovery, makeup work. And she did it. She graduated on time. And she went off to community college in Chicago to study cosmetology. She's just graduating this spring. She's going to go back and work with Lenita in her salon. So when you do the kind of reporting that I do, or when you hear stories like that or read books like mine, I think you often come upon these success stories, and I think they can be inspiring and moving. But to be honest, I think they can also sometimes leave us feeling a little bit empty or confused because they can seem so rare and random. We don't really know why some kids are able to succeed despite a troubled past and others are not. And what is so exciting to me about this new research is that I think for the first time we're coming to understand the science of how Keitha became Keitha. Both how the environment in which she grew up got her so completely off track, and then how the support and mentoring and intervention that she received got her so firmly back on track. There's a story that I think we tell in this country about kids who grow up in poverty, and mostly it's a pretty bleak and hopeless one. And what's exciting to me about this new moment is that I think for the first time we're coming to understand that there's a different sort of story that we can tell. The kids who grow up in poverty and disadvantage do not have to fail. But in order to succeed, they need help. And big brothers and big sisters are giving that help to these kids every day. And I think that's why this organization is at the center of this new and important national story. So I want to thank everyone in this room for the help that you're giving. And I want to thank you for giving me the chance to tell you a bit of my story. I hope I'll have a chance to talk with a few more of you later this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tubbs. Mr. Tubbs, as we say in Spanish, Mr. Fuerte. The hidden power, his breakout session, The Hidden Power of Character, will be in the Denver Ballroom 4, 5, and 6. It will be a question and answer session moderated by Rob Stein, who has worked on the front lines of education reform as a teacher, administrator, and university professor. Most recently, he led one of the nation's most high-profile turnaround efforts at Denver's Manual High School, the alma mater of the city's own Mayor Hancock. And now we'll hear from Steve Pemberton. Welcome, Mr. Pemberton.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, good morning, everyone. I'm saying that to make sure that I am awoken as well. I had some difficult travels and got here at 3:30 in the morning. So I don't know if those laughs are of empathy or something else. I heard it said a couple of times that we have 15 minutes, which reminds me of some great advice I received during my undergraduate days at Boston College. I pledged a fraternity, and all the members of the fraternity said, whenever you have something important to say in a short period of time to say it, all you really need to remember are the 5 B's. And the 5 B's meant, be brief, brother, be brief. So in conclusion, I want to thank you again so you're laughing because you heard speeches and you know they didn't get that little bit of advice. And certainly I want to echo the sentiments of thanks that Paul delivered. And you're going to hear that as a common theme. All of us are authors in some way, shape, or form, so we've wrestled with this issue on a number of levels, from the personal to the academic to the professional. And yet, this was an immediate opportunity for me, not just because I was once on the board of a Big Brother, Big Sister in Boston, where I'm from. I only need to talk for a couple of minutes, and it's very clear, apparently, that I am from Boston because I parked a car in Harvard Yard, apparently. And good, thank you. Some Bostonians here. Now I feel at home. I live in Chicago now, and Chicagoans always say, "You're not from here." They pointed out to me very, very quickly, and I'm hurting over what happened to my Bruins last night, but yeah, no, but it'll be all right. I think. But in all seriousness, the work of Big Brother, Big Sisters is so critical, particularly in these times. I have a number of friends in the media, and I often tell them that they have the narrative of our nation wrong, that they're so focused on what seems to be the cynical and the hopelessness that they forget what really has driven America. And it happens in quiet ways and in quiet corners, but it's very difficult for that story to get out there. And the more and more that we tell those stories, the more it redefines and shapes us. I think we're living in this generation of a prosperity gospel of me first, how am I doing, as opposed to how's my neighbor, how's my community, how are the children. I delivered a commencement address recently, and I told the graduates that, look, I'm the last teacher you're ever going to have, and like every good teacher, I'm going to give you a homework assignment. And your homework assignment is that you have got to somehow convince Facebook to put on their site a don't care button. Because when I see some of the things, because the fact of the matter is we really don't care. I don't care what time you woke up. I don't care what cream you had in your coffee and how much. And those things aren't particularly interesting. We want to know if you've changed the life. And have you changed the arc of a life? So it reminds us that we're not a nation of gotcha moments and salacious headlines and failing leaders. We're about a lot more than that. And what Big Brother, Big Sisters does is and I hear this all the time, that you make a difference. And that's actually not true. That's not true. You make the difference. And there's a world of difference between those two words. Because for so many of you, you are the difference between a life that goes one way versus another. And it's really that simple. And that shouldn't, Paul, create any more stress, I hope, for anybody here. But I hope it should affirm for you just how important you are. The hard reality of service generally is that you never really know the impact that you have, and that is the truth of it all. Because it's never just that one child's life you're changing. Sometimes we say that too, that we want to make a difference in the life of a child. And that's not true either. We want to make the difference in the lives of generations, because that's exactly and precisely what happens. Now, how do I know that? Well, I know that largely because of my own experiences. I think society would say that I'm one of the success stories that Paul was referring to. I grew up in Massachusetts in foster care. I was a collision of labels, and I knew it. I'm African American. I have blue eyes. I had a blonde afro and a Polish last name of Klakowicz. And so every day somebody is asking me, now what are you, and where do you come from, and who do you look like? And nearly every day of my childhood, the answer was, I don't know, because I didn't know. I went off into foster care largely because of those labels. I remember sitting in the car with a social worker one time, and we had been going from one place to another place to another place, and finally my enterprising 4-year-old mind asks, well, why is this so hard? Why is it so hard to find me a home? And she said, Steve, we don't know if you belong with a white family or a black family. Now, when you say that to a 4-year-old, the only thing they've experienced in the way of color at that age is a box of crayons. So when she said that, I thought she was referring to the color of the house. And so I next asked in my own mind, now why does it matter what color the house is? I just want a place where there's going to be safety and love and security. It didn't need to be a color. And all these many, many years later, I still think like that. Why does it matter? Because there are some things that are certainly a lot more important. I'd like to tell you that I was taken in by a wonderful foster family. That wasn't true. I was taken in by people who did so for money, and I knew it and I felt it. And even those who said that they were there to support me and help me, I remember their looks of pity and empathy, their looks that said, something about you is broken. You're a quote-unquote troubled youth. I never understood that phrase, troubled youth. What was troubling about me? I was a child. So am I about to get in trouble? Is my very presence here a matter of trouble to someone else? And it's my ardent wish that we get rid of that phrase, troubled youth. So I remember the things that I was called Beyond Hope. The title of my book, A Chance in the World, wasn't one that I came up with. It came from a diary entry of a babysitter who at 1.5 years old saw the very desperate situation, circumstance that I was in and said, this little boy doesn't have a chance in the world. At 1.5 years old, that was the prediction. And no one around me ever envisioned that I would be in this point in my life. No one. And this would continue well into childhood. Rather, I was called a whole lot of other things. Broken, something about him is not quite right. Goofy, dumb, ugly. I'm still trying to figure out that ugly part now. Look at this profile now. I want you to... Don't laugh at that. I'm just serious. No child's ugly, am I right? No child's ugly. So how am I here? How am I here? When you overcome adversity, there is a tendency in our society to elevate the individual, to suggest of him or her that there's something innately enabling about them. They were born with something that another child doesn't have. And I will confess that I do have a singularity of purpose and of will. And I had a vision for where I wanted to go. But I didn't know how to get there. And I had a foster family in particular who every single day of my life made it a point for me not to be there. And so I fought them. But I got tired of fighting. I want you to hear that. I got tired of fighting with all of my will and all my strength and all my power. Even as a child, I got tired of fighting. So I had people do small things that they didn't know at the time were big things. Sitting on a rock wall across the street from a foster home, a woman sees me reading a book. She notices that I'm reading the same book over and over and over again. And later on that night, she stops by and gives me a box of books. And she would do this every few months for the remainder of that decade I would spend in that house that was hell to me. But those books gave me vision. They were my mentors. They gave me vision and a sense of purpose and place. So my reality, my mindset was I need to be, and I want to be like the characters in those books that she gave me. Once I published my book, many, many years later, after I'd lost contact with her, a group of people seek her out. I hadn't remembered much about her, only the name that was in the inside of the books. It was Mrs. Levin. But I didn't even know if that was her right name. But I can tell you all these years later, I did have her name right. It was and is indeed Mrs. Levin, Claire Levin to be specific. She today is 79 years old. She hadn't heard from me in 30 years, had no idea what had happened to me, but she had remembered me, and I in turn had remembered her. My point is sometimes it takes until you're 79 years old to see the goodness that you do. But she changed her life. A few days after Christmas, when I'm 16 years old, and I escaped this foster home, and it nearly cost me my life. I'm sitting there at the table with my social worker, and he has a list of names that he's calling. He's trying to find a place for me to stay. But the problem is that I'm male. It's the holidays. I'm 16. I'm African American, and I'm about to age out. And so nobody knows what to do with me. There is no big in my life. The office is emptying, and he's calling names, and he uses this phrase over and over again. I have a client here. I have a client here. And that clinical term troubled me so much. But I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to help me. And finally, he steeples his hands behind his head, and he says, I don't know where you're going to go. Do you know anyone? And I seized on a comment that I overheard one teacher make to another teacher when I was asking him how to register for the SAT. And as I walked away, he didn't know I heard this. But as I walked away, he said, I don't have any children. But if I did, I'd want my son to be just like Steve. So I'm sitting there a couple of years after he makes that comment. And my social worker says, do you know anyone? And I said, well, I know this teacher who I think likes me. He says, well, do you know how to reach him? I said, well, I don't know. I know he works at the local college on the break, but it's the break. Maybe we should call him. And so we do. And miraculously, he is the only one on that college campus that day. And I would spend the rest of my high school with him. And today, my children call him Grandpa. So it's not a child's life, it affects a generation. I'm often asked, why did I write my book? You're a corporate executive at Walgreens. You have this great life. Why write this book? Why share the story of everything that you've endured in that search for family? Why tell that story? Well, it's because I know that we hide behind these pictures, these idealized pictures of American life, but you and I know that's not reality. That in every single one of our families is a little bit of brokenness, a path that wasn't smooth. And that's just not my story. That's all of our stories. Somewhere in our tree is a story of a little. And we know that. So it's important for us to get our stories out. And we have to be clear about our message to the littles when we deliver it. We have to be very certain that we say, when you look at us, don't see someone beyond you. Someone who was born with a talent and ability that you don't have, because that's not true. I tell littles that are part of my life, I am you and you are me. I'm just a little bit older and I'm not nearly as cute. Don't see me as somebody beyond you. See what you can be. See what you're going to be. I tell them that on this little matter of whether or not you are special, because littles ask that question all the time, am I special? And my response is this: the answer to that question was decided a long time ago by an authority much greater than you. You are special. And perhaps maybe that same authority has chosen you to end this cycle of dysfunction that you didn't ask for, that you didn't create, but you will take on the responsibility for changing. That too is a message that we need to deliver. I tell them that they're loved, and there's really not a damn thing you can do about it. There's a young man who, an older boy who, he's friends with my son, and his father's not around. His father's kind of in the public limelight, and I can't tell you the number of times, instances I'll walk into a gym or I bring him with me everywhere. And people always say, because there's no physical resemblance, are those your boys? And I simply say, yes, they're my boys, and I let them figure it out. And lastly, I really did write this book for you as well. I have an opportunity in my breakout to talk about diversity and its impact. But it's critically important that you understand that you are making the difference. And I know it's hard. I know there are times where you see difficult moments, both in the littles that you work with, the organizations that you run, and you wonder in your heart of hearts and in those quiet moments, am I making a difference? We might not admit it, but we feel it. And I am your answer. You know the answer to that question because I'm standing here. And I'm standing here because of you, Mrs. Levin, and John Sykes, a teacher who took me in, and a librarian who also helped me, and a number of people just like you, same spirit, same love of children. And this product, this humble product, is what happens when you dare and you dream and you believe. So I celebrate you, and I thank you, and I look forward to talking with you further. Thank you.
Very powerful. Thank you so much, Steve. Mr. Pemberton's breakout session will be in Denver Ballroom 1, 2, and 3. And now, Dr. Larry Bentro. Dr. Bentro, welcome.
We seem to have lost the visuals. There they come. I'd like to dedicate these moments to a person that I met on his 90th birthday, and our organization had been working for over 20 years in South Africa. And my colleagues, including a person I was with last night, are being called back because this is the end of an era. let us build a country in which our children and youth can learn to care for and respect others. Oh, that policy leaders and political figures in our country had that vision. Then we would work on meeting the needs of children. And as my colleague, Lakota psychologist Martin Brokenleg says, the needs of children are the same everywhere in the world. We wrote a little book about this in 1990, and this is the second edition coming out more recently. And if you're going to sum up all of the research on positive youth development, the problem is you have too many lists of characteristics. Peter Benson's, 40, and somebody else's other assets. And they all really distill down to these 4 things. And the art was produced to demonstrate these by a young man who should have been mentored. And so I had to go inside a correctional facility as he drew these things. Here, he said, is where it all starts, with belonging. And then the people that you attach to teach you the skills that you need to live your life. And you develop this strength and independence, and then you give it back in generosity. When we first wrote about that, it didn't dawn on us that these were universal needs, because we were describing how traditional Native peoples in North America raised their children before the European pioneers came, bringing some wonderful things from the European culture, but being pretty naive about children. My grandfather, who was born in Germany and came alone at 15 for freedom, was never really free, because we drag our cultural tales behind us. Was ist los mit du Dummkopf? He would say, what is the matter with you, dumbhead? But in Lakota, the tribe in which I have been adopted, the word child means sacred being. Who would ever scream in the face of a sacred being? Who would ever put one of those in a boot camp so someone could scream in the face? And so when the circle is broken, when any of these needs are not met, then we have a whole host of problems, like troubled children at the top, and all the variations. And all of the books written about them sometimes confuse us. But it all gets down to this: when we nurture children, all is well. But we have large numbers of children who are adult wary. You can almost tell as they look in your eyes that they're not going to leap into your therapeutic mentoring relationship. And these disconnected kids are pretty good psychologists. And they're sitting there asking, why should I trust this person when others who were to take care of me did not? And such was the case with John Sida, whose book I will talk about a little later today. John was removed at age 8 in Cleveland, Ohio, from an alcoholic, probably sex trade mother. And he was furious, and he was alone. And so he would fight the foster placements. And then people would call the social workers and send him to another foster placement. And he actually purposefully tried to get kicked out of all of them, because he thought if he exhausted what the social workers came up with, they'd have to find his mother and send him home, because whatever limitations she had, there is no bond more powerful than that person that you began to be connected to 9 months before you saw the light. And so they decided they would send him up to Michigan, where I was the young president of Star Commonwealth, kind of a boys' town sort of place. Founded by Floyd Starr in 1913, this is our centennial, with the motto, "There's no such thing as a bad boy." Most people think that's Boys Town. They weren't open yet. And so he comes up in his court car, and it's my job, I'm this new president of this organization, I'm going to interview him. And I've been working with kids for a lot of years, so I try to draw him out, silence. So I try to motivate and interest him, silence. 45 minutes of silence interrupted by a string of profanity at which he tells me, he isn't coming to this expletive deleted place, and he sure as isn't talking to me. So they took him back and they locked him up, and after a while he came. And it was one young, naive mentor who changed his life. As John would tell it, Luther was too naive to know I was hopeless. The social workers all knew, and I had all of these diagnoses. And by the way, he went back and got all of the case records and read all of those things. He said it made him sick to his stomach. And Luther worked on the two strengths that I had. I knew everything about baseball, John said, because the Cleveland Indians were my substitute family. And Luther knew a lot about baseball. And then I was really good at fighting adults, so Luther would fight with me all the time. Can you imagine a team like the Cleveland Indians losing again? When are you going to switch to the Detroit Tigers? And so a bond was formed. And then other people came into that circle of trust. And he never ran away from ours. Here he is a year later. Look how tall he is in the middle. And by the way, in the upper right is old Floyd Starr, 90 years old, and me when I was a lot younger than today. So what happened to this kid? Well, he actually finished high school, went to college on a scholarship, dropped out of college, got a job working in a detention center, got fired from the job in a detention center. You see, our brains aren't ready, as Paul writes about, until we're 25. And today, he is Dr. John Sida. A resilient scientist and a professor at Michigan State University who has dedicated his life to building this evidence base. But he often says this, it's not programs that change people, it's people that change people. And he invited me to write his second book with him, which is called Kids Who Outwit Adults. And we found these kids who push mentors away and got their best advice as to what their strategies were so that we can figure out how to connect with adult-wary kids. And another of our supporters from that part of the world that we're remembering today wrote a foreword to that book. A man who used the reunite word called reconcile. So reunite, reconcile, reclaim. And he writes, if we do not do all we can to salvage these children, it's almost like spitting in the face of God. What an opportunity to have 15 minutes with a group like you.
Thank you, Dr. Ben Brentrow. Dr. Brentrow's breakout session will be in Colorado Room G through J. First of all, I just want to thank our panelists for just wonderful, passionate presentations. Please give them a big round of applause. On behalf of Univation and our panelists, I would like to thank all of you for your great work and for your commitment to our children, for helping them achieve their dreams and sometimes even define those dreams. Have a wonderful conference and we'll be back together at lunch. Muchas gracias.